Guruve Gaura Chanjaya Radhika Etadari Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tada Bhaktaya Namo Namaha Vancha Kalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vaevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Garidhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Naya quiet. Dhanavad devotees. So I'm trying to catch up on questions and answers, and I did get a question from a very dear friend and god sister, and she was asking about a conversation we had recently, speaking about the weaponization of Bhakti. And so I was just giving some points about how some people, under certain conditions, utilize the principle of Bhakti, not Bhakti itself, because Bhakti itself cannot be weaponized. Because Bhakti is an independent spiritual reality, it doesn't come under the control of the jiva in their conditioned state to weaponize it. So sometimes we may say, like in the case that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he came with his angas and astras, means his associates and weapons. But in this particular case, the meaning here is that Bhakti is being used in the capacity of a seva to defeat the illusory energy. But in terms of weaponizing Bhakti in the context that we were speaking, which is when aspirants in their unfolding stage utilize the idea of Bhakti as a moral high ground to establish their own particular agenda, then that is not really a weaponization of Bhakti per se, but a weaponization of the misapplication of Bhakti. I've spoken before about the misapplication of Bhakti. So it's when a ideal of Bhakti is taken and misused or misapplied somehow or another. So when a person may want to establish, based out of the false ego, is a very amazing phenomenon. False ego is the basis under which all of our self-conceptions are protected. So I've mentioned this many times that avidya has 5 features. I'm not going to go through all of them because I mentioned them on previous classes. That asmita means that avidya awards a condition under which the true identity of the jiva, which is dasosmi, is covered. Because that true identity is covered, asmita also needs a functioning support for the misconception of being something other than the das of Krishna. And ahamkara is that support system for asmita, that false sense of not being the das of Krishna, but being something other than the das of Krishna. So in ahamkara, there is the ability to serve as a insulator and protector for our self-conceptions. So when we want to protect our particular self-conceptions and our agenda, etc., then we utilize the thing which is most valuable in our experience as the highest type of weapon. Right? So you'll see, like within the material framework, people will utilize whatever standard, right? It's called an artha, right? It means a value. Whatever their value system is, they use that as the standard by which to execute their agenda. And if they're in competition or they're in disagreement with someone about the execution of their agenda, then they will lean back into their artha or their support system for their material self-conception. They will utilize that value system as the weaponry for supporting what they are trying to accomplish in their agenda. So, especially within the circle of aspirants in Bhakti, obviously Bhakti is the highest artha. It is the value system related to those who are aspiring to obtain pure Bhakti. So when there is some personal agenda born from, again, the maintenance of the ahamkar, right? Then we tend to utilize that value system as our weaponry, right? So you'll find that many times those who are unfolding in the process, if they have some disagreement with someone, they will not weaponize Bhakti again, but weaponize the misapplication of Bhakti for the accomplishment of that personal agenda. For instance, it may be seen that someone will say, well, I'm trying to find an example. We have a disagreement about some particular pattern of behavior. Someone is saying, well, listen, I'm still growing, and because I'm still growing, therefore I may need to be involved in certain activities. Like I still have a tendency to socialize with certain friends. And someone else, especially if it's a familial arrangement, right? Someone else may feel, well, no, I don't want you to do that. And in not wanting you to do that, which is really based in my personal agenda, right? I may see that, well, it's not doing bhakti to do what you're doing. You understand? So it doesn't really accommodate the fact that maybe I don't like the friendship that that person is having. I don't like the person that is the basis of that friendship. So I've now taken bhakti, because it's the highest value system that we have mutually, and I've weaponized it to execute the agenda of not wanting you to associate with that person. I may have a strong belief that that person's association is not good for you. It may or may not be true. This is the point. Now, obviously, it's not a weaponization of bhakti where it is truly not good. If you say, well, we're all going out drinking or something, no, I mean, that's not a weaponization of bhakti. That's a literal, truth being spoken to you, whether you want to digest it or not. But in a case where I do have a personal dislike for somebody, I just don't feel that they're the best person for your association, not based on any solid pratikul, means things that are adverse to bhakti, but just my own personal not appreciation of that person, I then weaponize bhakti, since it's our mutual highest value system, to use that as the chastising element. They are not good for your bhakti. And because that becomes the basis now for my argument for executing my agenda, at that point, I would take it that if you disagree, you're disagreeing with bhakti. So that's an example of the weaponization of the misapplied bhakti. Not bhakti itself, but misapplied bhakti. So this happens in so many different circumstances. It not only happens in situations where we utilize it as being the thing which is supposed to place my agenda and my perspective above and beyond whatever counter argument you have, but also it puts you hopefully in an emotional place where you now have to accept it, not based on our subjective disagreement, but based on this established value system authority of bhakti that I've presented. Though I have not really truly presented it from the perspective of bhakti, I've simply presented it as a weaponization of misapplied bhakti to accomplish my agenda, which is not to have you associate with that person because I don't like them. Classic example, when many sadhus, and particularly my Guru Parapadma, began to travel, then institutionally there was a great misapplication and weaponization of bhakti. Because some devotees were being told it will be against bhakti in terms of being against loyalty to Guru to entertain association even with another pure Vaishnava. So that's a complete misapplied weaponization of Bhakti. And people would give many reasonings based also in the misapplied arena of Bhakti. Well, you know, that person has a different mood, but what is mood? Never made clear, right? Well, that person is teaching something different or giving a different emphasis. Well, what exactly is being taught differently and what emphasis is different? That's also never clarified. But on the basis of the mutual respect for Bhakti and even the institution through which we may have originally gleaned an interest in Bhakti, people took that and weaponized it, misapplied and weaponized it in order to accomplish the agenda of keeping a certain loyal congregational base, so to speak. So that's another example of the, quote, misapplied Bhakti being weaponized. So there are many instances. Also another instance of this is when a person has had, like I did another video earlier, not today, but sometime, a couple of days ago, whatever it was, when a person has had, is having a bad reaction to misapplied Bhakti. When a person has been hurt or even suffered some kind of trauma in relation to the misapplication of Bhakti, in many cases, the arising of a weaponization of misapplied Bhakti on their part comes about. What do I mean by that? Someone having experienced misapplied Bhakti in an institution. So now, when the trauma of that misapplication sets in, you want to respond to it. You want to deal with it. You want to attack it. You want to crusade against it. So then what you do is you yourself misapply Bhakti and weaponize it, and you go down a whole tract of line of thought that's really not Bhakti, but you're doing it as a reaction to your own pain and trauma in an attempt to both heal yourself, though not in the best way, and simultaneously attack that which you thought was the cause of your trauma or suffering. So there's many ways in which misapplied Bhakti can be weaponized to accomplish an agenda. Another situation of the misapplication and weaponization of Bhakti is to put Bhakti, pure Bhakti, in the spotlight of criticism based on what you suffered in the misapplication of Bhakti. That means now start looking at Bhakti as, well, really, there's an inherent fault in Bhakti. Just like I had a discussion the other night, it was interesting. It was an interesting discussion. A very dear friend as well, very dear friend and old friend also, someone I've known for quite some time. They raised the question, and I spoke pretty strictly to that question because I realized the question was coming from really a pain, again, of misapplied Bhakti. And in that pain, there was a, for lack of a better word, crusadership that arose based on the particular type of pain that person was going through. Because it was a dual kind of pain that evolved from not only institutional misapplication, but also the effect of that misapplication on a personal relationship. So now that person was pursuing a line of thought that wanted to point out possible faults such as misogyny, etc., or patriarchal overlordship that's present in Bhakti, right, which is not true, obviously, but was by their perception true. And to evidence it, there was a question that was given: why is it that ladies are not allowed to wear a upavit, means a Brahmin's thread? So is that based in misogyny or unequal dealings between men and women, etc., etc.? So when we really got down to the nuts and bolts of the question was, what is the Brahmin's thread in the first place? You can buy them for less than 3 cents in India. Of course, when they reach America at your local temple gift shop, suddenly they've gone up to $1 each. But basically, it's a 2 cents or 3 cents thread. And even if you look in our Guru Parampara, it was primarily introduced by Srila Bhakti Saraswati Thakur in order, he wrote one book called Brahman and Vaishnava. And it was a pushback against the Jatko science Smarta Brahmin community that those who are Vaishnavas, though not being born in Brahmin families, were certainly equal to, if not superior, to Brahmins who were born simply in the caste of Brahmins. So to prove that point, he established the wearing of the upavit, means the Brahmin's thread, because he considered that those who have taken the Vaishnava Dharma, and it is supported by Srimad Bhagavatam, those who are chanting Harinam, who've taken up Vaishnavism, they surpassed all Varnashram Dharma. What to speak of Brahmin? But prior to Srila Bhakti Saraswati Thakur, in again a model of getting free completely from the idea of Varnashram Dharma, then if you look in our Parampara pictures, Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur is not wearing a Brahmin's thread. Neither is Gaur Kishoras Babaji Maharaj. And as you go back, you really don't see them wearing Brahmin's threads. So the point here is that what was the real significance inherent in that question? Because certainly the Brahmin's thread does not make the efficacy of your chanting of the Diksha mantras enhanced. The thread doesn't perform some magic intervention in helping the mantras to become more effective or something. So without that history, without that knowledge, the question was framed as a kind of weapon in the agenda to look and see if there was misogyny in bhakti, because that would be something that person was crusading against. You understand? And now in the arena of bhakti itself, to carry out that crusade, because this is where the genesis of their own trauma came from, right? Emotional or otherwise trauma. They were pushing back on that idea by weaponizing the idea of something present in bhakti, like the wearing of the upavit. You understand? It really didn't have anything to do with the thread itself, because if you want to, you can order one from India or buy one at a local store and put it on. Nobody would be stopping you. But the point is, your question really is, why isn't it not accepted? Why is there a difference between men and women in this regard? So I brought up a few points. One is, when there's a marriage ceremony, normally ladies might wear a Mangala Sutra, which is, it's a nose ring and it goes around the ear, etc., etc. Right? It's very auspicious, right? And in the history and culture of Vedic marriage, this has been something that's done. So I say, well, why doesn't the man wear the Mangala Sutra? You understand? Or for that matter, why doesn't the man put on the sari and the lady put on the dhoti, etc.? So in other words, the externals of these things wasn't the issue. The issue was getting at the trauma that person experienced, and now the weaponization of a crusading mentality against something perceived in bhakti as being faulty. So in this way, again, bhakti or misapplied bhakti is being weaponized, right? Because it's a misapplication of the concept in bhakti to think that the upavit has some special indication regarding the dealings between men and women. And by bigger implications, the whole culture of Vedic culture is implicated in some kind of misogyny or inequality between men and women, etc., etc. You understand? So it's a particular weaponization coming from that particular angle. So I don't mean to prolong this, but the idea is that the way to tell is, again, the vetting process. Almost universally, anytime you see, except within the context where somebody is trying to weaponize bhakti on the basis of sastra, right? Like I mentioned the example when there was a recommendation, you cannot go and see another Vaishnava, because by seeing that Vaishnava, you would be doing disobedience to Sri Guru. And then the misapplication of sastra comes in, because then it will be said that the order of the spiritual master should never be disobeyed. This is one of the offenses in chanting Harinam. So if you will go to see another pure Vaishnava, then you'll be disobeying the order of the spiritual master. That order was passed down by mantle to us, who are the ecclesiastical body of this institution. And so in this way, a whole misapplication of the weaponization of bhakti based purportedly on sastras happening, right? But of course, if you really deal into Sastra, it's clearly mentioned that a real aparad would be Vaishnav aparad. And Vaishnav aparad is of 6 categories. Hanti, Nindanti, Vaidveshti, Vaishnavam Nabhinandati, Krujite, no Hashanam Dashane, Patananisat. One's position will be compromised and one will fall if they harm a Vaishnav, if they blaspheme a Vaishnav, if they fail to welcome a Vaishnav, if you'll maintain envy towards a Vaishnav, if you'll be angry towards a Vaishnav, and no Hashanam Darshane if you're not elated to see a Vaishnav. These are all aparads to Vaishnavas. And the chief aparad to Harinam is Sadhu Ninda or Vaishnav Ninda, offending a Vaishnav. So here was a misapplication. You'll go to the third aparad, misquoted out of context, avoiding the very first aparad. Avoiding mentioning and realizing the first aparad. But in all other cases, normally, the weaponization of the misapplied bhakti comes from unvetted sources. Almost universally, people will come back with information content that has come from sources outside the realm of Guru, Sadhu, and Sastra. Right? They'll come with, well, some person wrote a book on this, or the one author wrote a book on this. And I mentioned also in a previous conversation about social engineering, we've also allowed many terms and their associative meanings to come into the Vaishnav Mandal, right? Simply by not vetting things according to Guru, Sadhu, Sastra. So now somebody writes a book and they come up with a term, the term becomes popular. Like I gave the example of spiritual bypassing. If you research in the lexicon, in the, means the sort of common parlance that people are using, you'll see this was introduced by one Buddhist guy who happens to be a psychologist or sociologist, I cannot remember, who had some observation in his own Buddhist community about certain things, coined the term spiritual bypassing based on his vision of things, and that became a standardized, based on the book, etc., became a standardized sort of mindset. People picked up on the coined term, and now it seeps into the Vaishnav Mandal and the Vaishnav parlance. And now if you tell somebody, for instance, that in your condition, the best thing you can do is to deepen your sadhan bhajan, that will be spiritual bypassing in lieu of other things you think they should be engaged in, which requires some divestment of faith from bhakti and investment of faith in that alternative modality. You understand? And also, even the idea, another weaponization of bhakti, is to create dichotomies between things where there's no dichotomy. Just like I remember I was giving a class about the nature of absolute faith in bhakti. And the fact that faith, shraddha, is our spiritual currency. And therefore, if you make a full investment of that spiritual currency in bhakti, it becomes the basis under which shraddha anusari. The progress in bhakti is anusari to shraddha. It means it follows the degree of your shraddha. And shraddha is right there in the very beginning. Shraddha anupayani varajam bhakti unmukhi chitti vritti visesh. It is shraddha that breaks the connection of the jiva with the material world. Similarly, shraddha shabde vishwashkohe shudjura nishtoy. Krishna bhakti koili savakam kritoy. And in the paramaktic root, means in the form of shraddha at its highest phase, it gives the realization that everything, nothing is not related directly to the sadhan bhajan practice related to developing praying for Krishna. You understand? There's nothing outside of that. Everything that we need to obtain pure bhakti and inclusive of happiness in life, everything, solid relationships, everything. Mahaprabhu spoke in his ecstasy of Shashashtakam and Antilila. Nam namakari bahuda nija sarva shakti. In my Harinam is all Shakti. Nama Chintamani Krishna's Chaitanya Ras Vigraha. The Nam is Chintamani. Chintamani means what you contemplate. If you have the desire for wonderful family life, if you have the desire for peaceful personal life, all can be accomplished by Harinam. It has to be Harinam done in anugatya of those who are allowing the flow of the pure conceptions of bhakti to come. But even there's a pushback on that. Because people, when they're in pain and when they're in trauma, then the misapplication of bhakti is a huge thing. And in many of those cases, not only is the bhakti misapplied, right, which means it's not pure bhakti, but it's also then weaponized in order to accomplish that agenda. And I've just given several scenarios in which that would take place. So we should understand that the misapplied weaponization of bhakti is not something that's favorable to the development of bhakti itself, either when it is coming from a person using it to protect their own subjective agenda, or when it is institutionally used, or in many cases, sometimes we are in a position where we need the rectification of bhakti, but then we misapply and weaponize bhakti against itself. You understand? So we start to look for ways not to have to do saranagati to pure bhakti. Saranagati is a very vulnerable position. But that's why Krishna told one of the very secrets of the verse, Savadama Parityaja Momekam Saranamraja Aham Tam Savapabhyo Mokshishami Masucha. Become vulnerable, Arjuna, in the sense that I'm asking, give up all other considerations except the highest kind of dharma. And a whole perspective on how to understand Bhagavad Gita according to different levels of understanding. So here he's saying, give up everything. So Rinda to Braja Bhav. You understand? But don't fear that as a result of giving up your social swadharma, that you will suffer. Mokshishami Masucha. You become completely purified by my protection. You understand? So, in some cases, when devotees hear remedy of pure bhakti, they see it more as a challenge to what their self-conception of their dharma should be at that particular time. Therefore, they again weaponize a misapplied bhakti to fight back against bhakti itself. You understand? And they come up with ideas like, you're not truly living bhakti. You understand? You're just theoretically living bhakti. Of course, that is completely assumptive, right? Because you're not privy to that person's realization. But you say that because you want to defend the agenda that you may have. That agenda may be inclusive of self-healing, self-catharsis, and also, again, crusading against the source of what you thought or where you thought your trauma had come from. You understand? So then when somebody says, well, you know, Prabhuji, Didi, this really is not really the true line of bhakti, you push back on that by trying to use bhakti as the backdrop for reaffirming that your path is correct and that the path being espoused by that person who's offering it to you as a means to check your circuitous travels from the true path, you're using your weaponized bhakti now to push back by saying, no, this is real bhakti. This is real growing bhakti or progressive bhakti or elevated bhakti or something else, right? Because you're finding that I need to support the agenda I have in relation to this, and therefore I will attribute this to being pure bhakti in a dynamic undigestible by that person because they're in an archaic mindset or they don't really have any true connection with their inner self, and so many different things. You understand? So in this way, there's so many different iterations of the weaponization of misapplied bhakti. So Didi, hopefully this was helpful to you. I'll have to make this short because I am, again, multitasking and trying to do multiple services at one time. All right, my Dandavat Pranam devotees, all glories to Srila Gurudev, Srila Prabhupada, Rupanuga Guru Varga, Jai Vancha Kalpaturvishya, Kripashinda Vevacha, Patitanam Pavanevya, Vaishnavevya Namo Namaha, Jai Radhe Radhe.